social distancing, you say? The future is watching. Welcome to Opcode Virtual Summit.
I still can't share my webcam.
Yeah, I mean, if you can't, it's no big deal. Don't worry too much about it.
Okay, cool.
As to start video, yeah.
There we go. Cool. I mean, it's like the perfect background. All right. So are we good?
Yeah, you can start. All good.
Okay. All right. So today we're going to be talking about a topic called search and delete using eDiscovery, using EWS, Exchange Web Services, and Graph APIs. So a little bit about myself. My experience ranges from sysadmin to blue team, DFIR. I just like to automate things. A lot of code with Python and PowerShell. And as you can see, I like long walks with binary trees. So that's enough about me. Let's talk about Exchange. So Exchange is a complex beast. So if you have an on-premise Exchange, all your different clients will actually communicate over different services that are offered up by an Exchange server. So whether that's EIS, EWS, NSPI, MAPI, so on and so forth. But all of that is really just kind of stored in a mailbox database, a data store. And so each individual component, though, also can communicate with Active Directory or other services internal to your organization. If we scroll down a little bit, the Exchange Web Services that we're going to focus on is EWS or Exchange Web Services. It is an HTTP SOAP XML service, so not your traditional REST APIs or anything like that. It basically has central access to all services and features of Microsoft Exchange. And the overall architecture, as you can see, is that you have an EWS application, whether that's your client, and we'll talk a little bit about ActiveSync and auto discover. But part of it is that you'll just send an HTTP request to a load balancer, then a client access server, a client access server array, communicates between auto discover, which then connects to either Active Directory or any number of directory services. Or you could go by using EWS, you can actually access Active Directory as well as all the mailbox data stores of the databases that contain every message. There's some basic off there, but really we don't need to be too concerned about that right now. So the first one that I'm going to talk about is this Python package that I wrote called PyEWS. It is a cross-platform way to interact with Exchange Web Services, whether you're on Exchange 2010 or 2019. I could support 2007, but even at 2010, shame. It's just shame. But we have an Exchange Online, also to Office 365, the current version. This basically will wrap all the eDiscovery endpoints that are available through a Python interface or a library that you can import and use it. Documentation and the repository, it is up on pip. We'll talk about that. OS X or Linux install, pip install PyEWS. Same on Windows, pretty easy. It works with 2.7 and 3.x, mostly 3.6 and above. But so the main pieces of PyEWS, and we'll break down each kind of component, is this user configuration object. And this is just a class that you import. You just say from PyEWS, import user configuration. And it has a bunch of different components that you can configure it depending on what you need. The biggest thing with authentication to any eDiscovery or having the rights to search other people's mailboxes is the ability to have one of these kind of permission groups associated with your account, whether that's eDiscovery rights, compliance, or even your organizational management type role. That is, please don't do that. Even at eDiscovery, you have to be pretty strict on it. But For the basis of it, to start off, if you already have an account that has that right, then you automatically have the ability to basically search every single person's mailbox and do other actions within Exchange. These are God modes. So you have this user configuration. You just pass in your username and password, and you're good to go. So one thing I want to mention here is that currently PyEWS, Exchange in general actually supports OAuth 2 authentication. PyEWS, I have a branch that needs to be merged in and all that, but it currently only supports the traditional username and password, which is pretty common for most organizations. If you have an on-premise Exchange, you're probably not using OAuth 2. Impersonation rights. So we can authenticate as those, elevated permissions or those elevated groups, or we can actually impersonate another mailbox. To do that, you have to actually apply what they call an application impersonation, or this MS-exchange impersonation must be given to all the mailboxes and accounts that you want to have the ability to impersonate. What that means is that, hey, I'm Joe, but I want to act like Bob or Susan or whoever, and act as if I want to access my own personal email. So by giving that, with this impersonation object, you can actually pass in a principal name, an email address, and a couple other options we'll talk about in the next kind of section. But for the most part, if you want to impersonate, you'll have to be very selective of what members have that right. If not, just use the eDiscovery if you have the access. It's going to be much easier. But PyEWS does support impersonation. So by doing that, you still pass in that username and password, but you also pass in this my impersonation object here. And what this does is really, this is the class for impersonation. And we'll break down these components. I'm just trying to ease everyone into EWS and XML, but basically what we're doing is we're passing in this variable of principal name, a SID, or an SMTP address, or a primary SMTP address. So it's really just email address and SID, but they're just different names depending on how it's set up in your environment. What we're doing is really just creating this header object of SOAP. And so you're passing in and we're modifying the raw SOAP request by adding this additional impersonation connecting ID, whether that's your email address or SID or whatnot. We're just generating this XML. Okay, so if you'd like to use that impersonation, you first need to, again, create that impersonation object and you pass it in. Auto-discover. Is everyone, well, I don't know if you're too familiar with auto-discover, but it's when you connect a Windows domain machine to Outlook, and it automatically discovers your Exchange settings or your Outlook settings. That's auto-discover. It's really just a service endpoint that's provided by EWS, but it's kind of funny to me. Maybe I'm just super nerd, but the Microsoft recommends taking the following approach when actually discovering the auto-discover endpoints. So in Active Directory, there are objects that are hidden sometimes, depending what they're called SCPs or service connection point, and it actually points to the array or certain Exchange servers that you have in your environment. If you have a huge farm of them, or only 2 or 1 or whatever it is, these will actually have the entries in Active Directory that point to that specific Active Directory or that EWS server. So the other that they recommend is do that first, but then generate potential locations based on the user's email address. That's literally their recommendation. That's how their code and their logic and their .NET code and all that works is the same methodology. So it doesn't actually, PyEWS doesn't use SCP. I'm going to add it as an additional component that you can add on, but it would actually bloat the package by interacting with LDAP and Active Directory quite a bit. But what we do is actually generate this list based off of your email address that you provided into that user configuration. and we'll generate basically these URL types or these URL extensions. And these are the locations of all the AutoDiscover services or any combination thereof. And so we'll just try each one of these if you just wanted to use our the built-in AutoDiscover component. If not, you can actually, and we'll talk about that a little, you can pass in a different path. But if you just wanted to use AutoDiscover, we automatically do that for you. All right. And so once you've actually, pulled that information back, we actually pull down additional attributes about this server and about this user. So the, credentials, well, we pass those, but we have the EWS URL, and of course you did that. Demo gods. All right. So we pass in, the Exchange service. And also the entire raw SOAP request, which you can actually get across all the functionality within PyEWS. So AutoDiscover. AutoDiscover is a very specific endpoint that you have to provide to the EWS service. And to kind of not go into too much of a debate between EWS or SOAP APIs and REST, where with SOAP, no matter what, if you're trying to get data, you're always going to do a post method, HTTP method to that service. You're never going to do a get or a delete or something like that. SOAP is all, I hate to say that the RFC is kind of wishy-washy, but it's pretty much all is always going to be a post. And so what you have to do is you have to form this XML body to this service, and it's all wrapped around an envelope. And this envelope has these different namespaces that you have to identify or define. And this XML-NS, that means it's a namespace. And the A is, they're different attributes. Like A is for action, or actually WSA is for action. But XSI, SOAP, standard, so on and so forth. So you're creating this envelope, and then we're creating an individual header. And inside of this header, we can have different options just depending on what we're trying to actually implement. With the AutoDiscover service itself, well, with all requests, you're going to pretty much have to put in the requested version, and it's a very specific dot notation version, like 15.0.37.42. But we've already kind of figured that out with PyEWS, so you don't have to worry about any of that. But as part of this action, I want to actually call the AutoDiscover endpoints for this exchange. Ignore the number, it's just kind of, that's when it was first released, basically. And AutoDiscover, and then you have get user settings as the actual action that I want to perform. Again, if we wanted to do any sort of exchange impersonation, we would add that value there. And the 2 means this is what the user I want to get info about. Part of the body, though, of all these messages, or each individual message has very defined attributes and nested patterns. And so if you hated JSON, man, SOAP and XML is your worst enemy. But get user settings request message, this is basically saying, hey, I want to get all of these settings from this user by sending this request message. And I'm passing in the mailbox that I want to actually get the settings for. And these are the settings that I actually want to return back to me if they're available. Internal EWS URL, external DN, mailbox, Active Directory server, so on and so forth. And CAS version, this is your client access server version. So we send this request, we're sending a post request, and we'll automatically return these attributes that are used in other functionality within PyEWS. All right, so some additional options with this AutoDiscover or with this user configuration is that if you already know the Exchange version, then you can pass that in. And that makes it a lot simpler for PyEWS to figure it out. If not, then we will basically try every single one of these, greatest to least, as well as all those URLs that I was showing you before. So I think it's a total of potentially 35 different requests, just because it doesn't, it'll basically fail if we try that request, and we'll just try another one and keep going until there's no more, and then we'll finally fail. So with the Exchange version, if you do pass that in, it makes it a lot easier. If not, no worries. you won't notice a huge difference. So if you do not wish to actually use auto-discover, then you can actually set it to false and very specifically provide that EWS URL. Typically, if we're like Office 365, it will be outlook.office365 edis/EWS/exchange.asmx, which actually redirects to an SVC and what they call a WSDL. It's a defined language file that understands and can parse your request. All right, so with PyEWS, I'm just going to giving you a brief overview here before we get into the nitty gritty, but the currently available service endpoints are like delete item, get inbox item, get searchable mailboxes. We can resolve names as well as search mailboxes. And it's really easy if you import the base class of service endpoint. You can actually extend PyEWS to wrap for really by having one method that defines your XML, and you're good to go. So typical workflow, we're going to retrieve all the mailboxes. We don't know what mailboxes we have access to, and I don't require you to know their unique IDs. So part of this is we have this get searchable mailboxes. It will automatically, based on the user configuration settings that you've chosen, whether impersonation or not, will automatically try to find any groups or all accounts within your Active Directory or Azure Active Directory tenant, and will expand any other additional groups and return basically a unique list of all automated, of all groups or mailboxes within your Active Directory tenant. Once you do that, then we can actually search all mailboxes, and then we want to delete those messages. So we'll talk about this stuff in a minute, but here's an example of actually running get searchable mailboxes. And so we'll print out, the display name, external email address, any GUI IDs, and basically the primary SMTP address. And what we really want is this reference ID. And you see this is a nested OU group, and this is all based on Azure Active Directory path locations. So we need those to actually invoke and search, but we do all this for you. So once you've actually identified all those groups, whether if you have eDiscovery rights, then you're going to get all users. If you have impersonation, you have very select users, we're only going to be able to return those specific users that you have rights to search. So giving a single list or a single or a list of mailbox reference IDs, then we can actually apply the search. And part of this is part of the search mailboxes endpoint. And we pass in the string, and we'll talk about the different options here. But we have the user configuration object that we've created, as well as that reference mailbox list. And then we can print out, okay, the entire message or very specific attributes about that message. Here is when we're searching mailboxes, here's actually printing all the properties. And I have a weight, and so I'm printing them out to make it easier to show. But here's the body of the message: conversation index, created time, date times, display to, and when it gets there, so you can see there's a lot of different properties here. We have the message ID, but then we have the raw MIME content the base 64 encoded raw MIME content, as well as read time, sender, sort, subject values, all that. But then we also have the raw decoded HTML content of that message, so you can use that to do whatever you want at this point. And you can see there's an accept language, all the X headers, so on and so forth in the entire body. So that search syntax that I was just showing was, just subject : account. This means that we just want to find any message within all those users that we just identified as a account in the keyword or in the subject of the message. But we have a lot of different options that I think will prove beneficial for a lot of different use cases. But here's kind of this AQL, they call it, or AQS, or Advanced Query Syntax. And So imagine if you wanted to actually search for any email that had the word account subject, but you also wanted anything in the body that had the word click, and it was actually received today. All right, so pretty useful, if you have just a standard spammy fish email, mass, click here to upgrade your account, whatever. So if you have a subject though, but what if you wanted to get any attachment as well that may be on that message that has the word fax? That could be the extension, the actual name of the file, so on and so forth. Or let's say we wanted to do only from very specific individuals, and the subject had any of these words, whether it's raise, upgrade, warning, or expire, not concatenated, just any of them. Pretty useful. Then you also have subject Office 365, but not from our IT department or whatever that email address is. Though you can identify, people trying to spoof you, basically, or sending them off to users. But let's take it a step further when we say, okay, give me anything in the body that starts with HTTP and it was received today. You can search all your mailboxes every day and get every single URL, and it can be different patterns. This is just an example of URLs that have been actually sent to your users today. Additionally, you could add or just do this separately of any attachment sent in your organization. And you could actually pull those down, hash them, and then run them through your thread intel, do whatever you want. So there's a lot of power that you can use with the AQS. You just have to be a little fancy with it and read some docs. So I actually have a class wrapper that I'm working on because of all these, but it should verify your AQS syntax for you. But it's not complete at this time, but it will be soon. All right, so now we can actually delete that item. And so when we actually want to delete it, we need to specify either all the messages that we just found, or we need to actually specify a very specific message, whether that's the second one on the list or third one on the list. And basically, it's going to be this kind of long message ID that we need. And you have to make sure that you're doing it. If that message is moved or modified in any way, this ID will change, so it'll no longer be there. So it's not a static message or message ID. So we have a couple different options. Default is going to be moved to deleted items when you actually call this delete item method. But you can soft delete, which actually puts it in the dumpster or the recovered deleted items, or just a straight hard delete where it is removed. You cannot recover it from the mail store. So you have a couple different options as far as that. I recommend move to deleted items while you're playing around with it. But if you need it if you need a hard delete, then use with caution. All right, so that's EWS. We're basically requesting these SOAP XML structures, and we're generating it, and it's kind of a wrapper to generate that. Hopefully, I'll be getting to the point where I'm wrapping the entire EWS service infrastructure, but it's proven to be a little funky. So with Graphfish, this is another port of it. It's called Graphfish. It's a Python package. It actually uses Microsoft Graph API. We do have similar functionality as far as creating a search, deleting. We can get some mailbox rules, so on and so forth. It's all on pip, and you can install it. But one of the biggest things that I want to point out is that Graph uses OAuth 2 authentication, which you need to understand the different application scenarios and the grant flows that they actually have. There's basically two different ones that I like to use. This application scenario, these are always going to be user interaction authentication required. Basically, you're going to need this pop-up. You're going to get this. You're going to sign in to Office 365 or whatnot, and you're going to authorize this application to use it. It's great, but if you're trying to automate things, what you want to use is an application authentication or a domain or daemon service. This means that no user interaction is required, and you just pass it in a client ID, client tenant, and client secret, and you're off to the races. Just use a secure account or service account or a service principal. If you want to know more about OAuth, I do have some blogs out here. You can reach out, so on and so forth, or I'll post them in the chat later. So delegated authentication, again, these are the two different examples. Really, it's just a username and password are needed when you're actually using a delegated authentication or interacting authentication with OAuth 2. If you're using a backend or client credentials auth flow, you just need to provide those keys and you're off to the races. So why is Graph different? Graph's different because basically with EWS, you're searching all mailboxes and you're returning those results. With Graph, you're actually creating a search folder in each individual user that you're searching's mailbox that is hidden to them and can only be accessed by users with those appropriate permissions. So you're basically creating a folder in their mailbox that they just can't see. So once you actually configure this search folder, then you pass in parameters as far as when you're creating that folder to populate based on those search criteria. And this is similar to the AQL, slightly different, but it's pretty similar. Any email actually matching that criteria is then copied and to this folder, and then you can actually retrieve those messages. This means that instead of searching everything at once and only returning everything at the end, you actually can offload, and each mailbox is actually processing kind of in async or synchronous fashion. So this also means we can actually update, modify, or delete our search rules for a specific search folder. So we can create a new search. We actually pass in the name of the folder we want, wherever we want the search folder to be nested underneath or hidden underneath. In this example, it's inbox, and then we just provide, okay, the subject contains the word expires. We can get all those messages, again, print them out by just calling this messages method once we've actually created our search, and then we just pull in those messages, and we can actually delete those individual messages by just passing in the connector and user principal name that you want to delete from, and then you just pass in the message ID. If you want to actually delete that entire message search folder, you could actually do that as well by just giving it the folder name and the message ID that you want to delete from that search folder. Sorry. All right, so delete, pretty simple. Again, defaults to me, to my current mailbox as a user principal, because it's assuming this may be only used by you're just using it for yourself. But if not, you just need to pass in a list or a single user principal, and we'll delete it. So what I was meaning with the updated search is you can actually make changes to that search folder's parameters. So if I wanted to actually change it to contain subject expires with an exclamation point, what that will do is actually modify the search criteria for that folder, and any messages that did match the previous query but don't match the new one will be removed from that folder. So be careful. I just recommend creating another search folder, maybe with like a 1, or just kind of increment the numbers. However, it doesn't seem to be impactful when you create like 100 of them, because I've done that. I don't know on scale, but in a limited capacity, it didn't really matter much. And then actually, if you just want to delete that search folder, again, you can do the search.delete, and it'll delete that current search folder for you. All right. So I think I'm close on time, but so PyEWS is on Pip, PyPy, GitHub. The Read the Docs is out there. I actually just pushed a new change right before this talk. And then Graphish is out there. It's on GitHub. It's also on PyPy as well. If you want to reach out, I'm MS Administrator on Twitter, GitHub. I have a lot of open source projects out there, so check them out. And then my blogs, let's automate.it. Yeah, thank you very much.
Well, thanks to you. It was a pretty good presentation. And yeah, like I was telling you the other day, like with all those BEC thing happening now, yeah. I still think like Office is a pretty big target. Like for people who are watching this presentation, one of the reason is scripts are pretty cool. it's mainly also partly like I would say mostly that Office 365 user interface is really bad. It's just like it's terrible.
Yeah.
So
Their eDiscovery is basically non-existent, and it's this new search folder thing. It's weird, but it makes sense.
There's so many features and options. It's like I'm like, how can a mail client and like thing can be like so complicated, you know? It's like, that's pretty cool. I don't know if anyone in the chat has some question, but in the meantime, everything is on GitHub, right?
Yes, everything's on GitHub, and you should be able to reach all the docs and everything out there. Again, we have read the docs for the Graphfish is pretty well documented as well, and I'll post some additional links to like OAuth 2, and that's a little tricky to kind of set up if you're just not familiar with how OAuth 2 kind of works in its infancy or Microsoft's implementation, which is pretty standard compared to most that I've come across. But it can be a little tricky. You just have to have some additional rights or have someone that can elevate or create an application in Azure AD.
Actually, one question from the chat now is Microsoft going to kill search mailbox PowerShell command still? I don't
know. I actually haven't heard much about that because with PowerShell 7 and everything coming out, I know that there's still some limited functionality. More than I know that they're like EWS. What I've been told is that EWS will eventually go away. I personally don't see that happening. A lot of the .NET libraries that you come across, like as well as C#, the search mailbox commandlets and all that, are very XML and EWS focused. So I just don't see it happening. I think it'll take a long time for EWS to get away because, I mean, come on, people are still on Exchange 2010. So another 20 years maybe. It might go away. But as far as killing search mailbox, I don't think that they'll be able to. The one thing that I wanted to point out with PyEWS especially is that we're making those raw XML SOAP requests, which basically is what, again, all those search mailbox and any other commands are doing in Hood, which is much faster. I think PyEWS is quite a bit faster than all of them. I haven't actually, I guess, done some testing in that regard. Maybe I should, but you don't have that layer about extraction. You don't have to load all those libraries and everything. You just use requests and form the XML, and you're good to go.
Yeah, like you mentioned, XML is pretty. It's pretty hard to read. Like there's no alternative. Huh? Everything has to be done through XML, or.
Yeah, right. For raw EWS, yes. Graph is where they're trying to get everyone to go to, especially with the OAuth 2 and authentication. EWS supports OAuth 2 authentication, but they're trying to move everyone away from EWS into the Graph kind of. I think Microsoft in general has tried to move everyone to Graph. For all services, but with eDiscovery, there's not really a really good alternative that I've seen their UIs and with the I think they call it search and purge or something like that, or they used to. It's not very clean, and it crashed on me a few times. So I just went from the API perspective, and it's much faster.
Yeah. What about Graph API? Now, is it pretty stable, or is it still? Because I looked at it like a year ago. A lot of the API and the response you would have would be like incomplete. It was not that. It was still in early stage, I guess.
They've gotten better with their docs and everything. Definitely, a lot of the features maybe like in a you have to kind of read through them. Honestly, there's a lot of blogs and stuff about the different components. I think the hardest thing for a lot of people is the authentication as OAuth 2. It's very non-traditional. Basically, what you're trying to do is when you send that, those current credentials, it'll authenticate to Azure AD or your Azure AD tenant, and then returns a token, which then you use for all other requests, which then that request actually goes and checks AD and says, hey, is this token still good? And, it's kind of that triangle approach. But Graph overall is pretty good. They have a lot of actually really cool features in beta, in their beta branch or their beta endpoints. Which I would definitely, if you're interested in Graph and all that, check those out. There's some really cool functionality, like sending SMS or just any notification to any device. That's where, I guess in V2 of their APIs, that's where like Defender ATP lives and stuff like that. And they have some additional endpoints as well in the beta. So I think it's pretty stable for the most part. Yeah. I mean, I haven't run into too many bugs. Yeah.
I mean, like the main problem I have with it every time is like every time I want to try a feature, I realize I have to upgrade to like Azure Active Directory, like P1 or P2. I'm like, what the hell, like you're telling me now? And like, why didn't tell me like 30 days ago when I wanted the logs? It's like,
like the Azure
it's very
like
hard
premium
to read.
one,
it's like you need to be like a sales engineer to use it.
Oh, you do. I actually, we had a sales engineer, and I had him literally like a 3-hour meeting trying to explain to me like how all the pricing and everything works.
It's very confusing.
What I figured out is there's M365 and then Office 365, which then I think they just changed to M365.
I think they changed it.
There's each level, and Azure is out of that scope. So all the services that you think of, like Office Mail and all that, are all in the M365, and Azure is as well as a separate entity. It's complex. I actually have a write-up. Maybe I'll share that out too.
Okay, yeah, with pleasure. Well, there's no more question in the chat. Thanks again for joining us today. Cool. It was pretty awesome to have you, and really enjoyed the presentation. And,
Thank you.
I like the no slides mod. Like you did it pretty well. That's pretty good.
Yeah, and I'll put these up there as well. Like I like the using markdowns. It's a lot easier.
Yeah. I mean, markdowns are like pretty good.
I'll share them out.
And at least it's a good motivation to document stuff pretty well.
Yeah, and I don't have to do it twice.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks again for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Social distancing, you say? The future is watching. Welcome to Opcode Virtual Summit.
Well, welcome back, everyone. So I guess that's it for today, and I hope you had a great time. I see some people also connected from Kenya again. That's pretty cool. Like I was saying the first time, the first edition, one of the nice things now is that at least we know like people from everywhere can watch. So the cool thing is like when you're speaking also here is like that basically people who are watching you are not only like the security professionals that would usually attend the security conferences, but also like I try to push a lot to get more like students and also like people who cannot really like go to the US or Europe for conferences to attend, because then they can have access to good content. And
but I appreciate what you all are doing. This is awesome, and I think that I'd love to hear. Trying to squeeze it into half an hour is a lot of info, but hopefully it was good enough.
Yeah, I was like, actually, I was thinking about it, like 30 minutes. The thing is, it's a pretty good like format overall, because you don't want people to like extend too much, and also like people like usually their attention rate would drop at some point. So it's kind of like a tricky like like a point to find like you want to make it like long enough but not too long, You still want people to be like interested by it.
Hopefully the XML thing. Oh my god.
No, that's
fun.
Yeah, no, definitely. And so just gonna like I guess I will close the stream now. Thanks again for all our speakers for joining us today. So let me see if I can just show it on my screen again. Yeah. So thanks to Alex, Juan, Casey, Costin, Gurk, and Josh for joining us today. It was really cool to have all of you tonight. Thanks again also for like the chat, for participating. It's really a cool thing, to have a bunch of questions also from the chat. If people would be interested to speak, so like I said, the fourth edition, I guess, of that stream is gonna be in 2 weeks, so it's gonna be on the 6th of May, and so Thomas Reed is gonna be giving the keynote. If you know anyone else who would be interesting to have as a speaker, who would be interested in speaking, don't hesitate to shoot me a message, an email, or like on Twitter, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, so like you can just get notification when we go live. At the moment, the format is still gonna be the every 2 weeks thing, still like alpha day, and I think presentation 30 minutes, for discussion panel 45 minutes. This time I try to be a bit more on schedule than the previous times, and slides will be available, I guess, tomorrow on GitHub. I'm probably gonna like shut down the Matt bedroom studio now and grab some food. So and like I said, like the IRC stuff is dead, but because we also miss IRC, so the Discord channel is still up and alive. Actually, in a week, it's growing quite fast. I think there is like almost 150 people now. Which is pretty cool, and like I was telling Ryan before, I'll try to push also a bit more to get a bit more like students and young professionals to join, because I think we can have a pretty cool ecosystem, like just like 20-15 years ago when we were all using IRC, kind of like looking for some mentors online, and since everyone is locked down now, I guess it could be a good opportunity. So if like universities or like group of students who are interested in cyber, who want to join like a cool community, like don't hesitate to share. I think that would be quite cool if we can do a bit of knowledge transfer, and where people can ask questions, because like I was saying to another friend, well, a lot of things get diluted on Twitter, so it's not really, I mean, it's still a cool medium, it's not as efficient as it could be. And blog posts are also good, but since we can do things in video now, so I guess why not, And I guess that's pretty much it for today. And I guess wherever you are, like I didn't realize that Casey was in Australia. Actually, it's like 4+ a.m. Over there, so it's pretty funny. I was texting him before. I was like, are you still coming? Are you still coming? And then he was like, oh, I'm just drinking my coffee now. It's 3 a.m. But yeah, that's pretty funny. Thanks again for joining us today. And I guess see you in 2 weeks. So just mark your calendar for like the 6th of May. And it's going to be every 2 weeks on Wednesdays. Cool. Well, thanks to you.